Welcome back to High Class Gear. Get yourself ready for another great video. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you stay up to date with all the great content coming your way. The following story takes place in the year 1984. I was 10 years old and coming home early in the evening when I would have my world turned upside down. The Olympics were coming to Los Angeles and set to be held in the LA Coliseum. The USSR has said they were boycotting, and this caused some tension and also funding issues, but the US said they were going ahead, Cold War or not. Los Angeles had a slow-burning war between the Crips and the Bloods throughout the streets, and the Los Angeles Police Department was rapidly becoming the third gang on the street. I struggled with the large grocery paper bag with the gallon milk and the pack of 12 eggs. My mother had promised my dad and I a creamy blackberry cobbler with cinnamon-flavored crust if I would go out and pick up the ingredients and be back quick, and I obliged to do so. I was at the halfway mark when I felt some moisture on my arm. The bag couldn't have ripped, could it? I opened the bag and looked inside and found everything intact. Okay, good news, I thought. It's just the milk is so cold that I can feel it on the outside. It looked like the gallon container was sweating, it was so cold. I thought about cracking it open and taking a quick swig, but remembered the promise to my mom and dad, and quickly boosted the bag up and carried on. I saw a car, a Cadillac on hydraulics, bounce by with its beautiful candy paint and chrome suspension, the 100-spoke rim tires glistening in the sunshine. The driver smiled at me going by because he knew what I was thinking, and I knew what he was thinking. This was an amazing car. He'd done a damn good job making that vintage automobile a work of art. I fantasized about owning my own car and low-riding one day. In the middle of my fantasy, I saw a police car pull up just beside me and screech to a halt, mounting the curb. The familiar black and white colors always caught my eye. We learned to just call them black and whites when I was little because of how distinct they looked. The officers jumped out and immediately I was thrown to the ground on top of my grocery bag, and they yelled out, "What are you doing here, boy? Are you in a gang? What gang are you from? What's in that bag? Is it drugs?" The questions were coming thick and fast, and I couldn't even gather a response before they pulled the bag out from under me and gave me a kick for delaying the process. I was 10 years old. I looked just across and saw a whole bunch of other people at the curb where the grass met the sidewalk being restrained. When the officers picked up the bag, they opened it the wrong way around, and it made the eggs and milk fall out in exactly that order. When the gallon milk came down with all the force of gravity, I heard the crunch of the eggs under its weight and winced, as if I had been in the pack with the eggs. The eggs. I need to bring those home to my parents. I whined to the police. "Shut up, punk! Stay down or you'll taste this, you little bastard!" The officer pointed to the nightstick in his hand and my head. I stayed down and licked my lips to stop the saltiness from my tears going in my mouth. And then in that instant I was picked up and thrown into a big van with the other people that had been on the ground in the grass. I sat in the police van cross-legged on the floor, and by the look on my face the others could tell this might be my first time. One of the guys reached down and rubbed my shoulder. He had a black eye and an abrasion above it where the officers had struck him. I shook my head to say that I wasn't hurt, and he smiled, and so did the others. We'd become comrades in this van. Everyone began talking and laughing back and forth, some talking about what they might do once they're free again. I had no such hope of being free, and didn't know what made them think they'd go home. Upon arriving at this dark building, where we went under the ground, we were pulled out and frog-marched into a concrete place where the officers filed in. There were so many more officers. Where did all these guys come from anyway? They started making us run laps around this enormous building, and at times would strike at our legs to make us pick up the pace. After that, we were beaten again in groups while laying on our stomachs. After that, we were fingerprinted and told to stand up straight for photos. I kept being asked about what gang I was from, where I lived, what they called me on the street, my gang colors, and I didn't have answers to any of these questions except one. I knew where I lived and wanted to go home to my parents, to my family, to the people I knew. The officers just looked down harshly in their blackish-blue uniforms and told me that where I lived was a Hoover Crip neighborhood and that I had to be a member, even with me telling them I was not. At one point during the constant berating, I started to second-guess myself. Was I a member of the Hoover Crips? Did my parents just not tell me because it was just something you were born into? Kind of like what team you liked? Maybe it's like being a Raiders fan, I rationalized. If you're from LA, you're kind of just born to be one, whether you know it or not. Maybe that was the case with this Hoover thing. They kept screaming, yelling, and calling me all kinds of names that made my tears flow, asking me to show them gang signs, and I just looked at them dumbly, sometimes rubbing my head like I was trying to keep the words from going in. I could hear bodies hitting the wall not far from me and yelling as the guys that were in the van with me got beat just like I did. But it was worse. They were from gangs from what I could gather, and the police wanted to get after them. When I was pulled out of the questioning section, I was brought into an open area. My legs and arms hurt from all the pulling and kicking and my eyes felt puffy. Men that I recognized were photographed making hand signs and telling the officers things. So, they were in gangs? That's why they knew each other. After what felt like years, the officers told me to get the hell out of here and go home, and I was booted out the door and made my way onto the street. I looked back at the massive place and could make out the writing in the dark Los Angeles Coliseum. How would I get home? I wasn't going to ask those officers. They might beat me again and not let me go home. I ran and ran until I saw a payphone. I still had a few quarters in my pocket that survived my detention. I pulled one out and called home. I tried to sound strong as I told my parents what had happened, but I think all the crying scared them. I couldn't even direct them to where I was except that building I was released from. Eventually, after I regained my composure and told them more landmarks, they were able to reach me. I got in the car and apologized profusely for failing to bring home the milk and eggs, to which my parents reassured me and told me that no matter what, I was getting that blackberry cobbler. It turns out I had been gone most of the night. No one had seen or heard anything, so they called the police. My parents, brothers, and sisters had even driven around for several hours looking for me until they decided to wait at home for any news. They'd alerted my grandparents, who had vowed not to sleep until it was confirmed I was safe. I got home to a procession of people waiting outside the family house, and in spite of our problems with each other as siblings, even my older brother and sister were hugging me and glad to see me. And I had that blackberry cobbler after my dinner. My mother stayed up all night to make it for me because of how brave I was. She told me with the winsome smile and tired eyes of a worried mother for her son. Later on, I went to my bedroom and before going to sleep, looked out the window to see the street sign outside near the intersection South Hoover Street. So was I now a Hoover because I lived on Hoover Street? It wouldn't be until years later I could answer that question definitively. Years later, I would also come to know that that night's brutal attacks and those after were part of the Los Angeles Police Department's Operation Hammer, which was a citywide police crackdown to clean out and clean up the area around the Coliseum to prepare for the coming Olympic Games that year. They wanted a military presence on the street with armored cars, tanks, and kitted-out officers. They punched holes in walls, humiliated residents, did massive sweep arrests of anyone outside, and often vandalized the homes of local residents with vile police gang graffiti. What I learned that night was that power can make people do crazy things. You'd think that people with all that power would be secure, but they're not. They're afraid, and they want to stop you from threatening that power, or from giving the appearance to outsiders that they might not be as strong as other people think they are at that moment. The Olympics went off without a hitch that year, but the hostility and violence shown towards the youth exacerbated the race to collect guns to equal the firepower of the police. Gangs didn't have to recruit, but instead people flocked to them in droves, believing this could be protection from out-of-control law enforcement and the heavy-handedness of the sheriffs, the ruthlessness of Police Chief Daryl Gates, and the governor at the time, Pete Wilson. And this would set the tone for the rest of the state of California. If you enjoy these videos and what we do here, subscribe to the High Class Gear channel, give us a like, and hit the notification bell so you always get updates on new content every week. Stay safe out there.